Thanks everybody for staying around for the Ministry of Agriculture update here. Just wanted to do a bit of a review. So last year I talked about the fact that there would be some regulatory changes occurring in the next year. So December of 2017, we did make the updates to the domestic game farm animal regulations and the diseases of domestic game farm animal regulations to remove the reference to the industry consultative committee. I remember that was defined in the regulations, and as defined was impossible to form and hadn't actually been formed since 2008. And so that was causing some problems with doing regulatory updates and moving ahead on a few things. So now we are able to do things like update the Cervid import protocol, suspend a non-compliant game farm, or name a designated disease. Now all of those did previously require input from the committee that couldn't be formed. So the updating the Cervid import protocol, that's again in concert with the Ministry of Environment. They are hiring a new wildlife health biologist this spring. And that will be one of the things that that person will be working with us on. So I'm not sure how long it'll take, but sort of sometime within the next year we would expect to be able to update that protocol. It's dated, it goes back to 2003. There was a few scientific reviews since, I think 2009 and 2013, the scientific reviews were updated on that. But it will take a bit of time to review, but we are able to move forward on that now. Suspending a non-compliant game farm, so suspended herds can't move cervids or cervid products on or off. So we haven't, again, there have been no suspensions for quite some time. Did mention that there would be some increase in our regulatory oversight. So herds whose licenses were renewed last year, so a year ago in December, some of those have not met the conditions as far as inventory and those sorts of things. So they're going to be issued notices of violation, and if we get to the 2 years down the road since their licenses were renewed and they're still not complying, we will be looking at suspensions on those herds. And we'll sort of start applying those as new farms are regulated. So we are attempting to actually do some enforcement and follow up on the existing regulations. Nate?
I have a question before we go. The import protocol, is that going to be a generic protocol that applies to all jurisdictions?
No, this is our provincial. Sorry, this is an import protocol for Saskatchewan, so we'll address imports of animals into the province from various places. Yeah. Yes. And it does now. I mean, some things are allowed, some things aren't. But right now, you'll be aware of some of the information for Brainerd, for example, the protocol of 2003 references tests that we can't access and things like that, so it really doesn't work.
Yeah, good, thank you.
You may or may not like it yourself, so I guess we'll have to see where we get that. We are looking up. We are also looking at further regulatory changes in 2018. So one of the proposals will be addition of license fees. So you'll know that right now that's a 5-year license and at no cost. We are looking at moving to a 2-year licensing period, and the fee would be $400 for the 2 years, or $200 if the herd is on the CWD Voluntary Herd Certification Program. So the thinking behind that is the herds that are on the VHCP are meeting most of our regulatory requirements, as our inventories and birth deaths and all those things require less regulatory oversight on our part, and they would be subject, if the owner wants, to the CFIA control programs. So again, less regulatory input required from the province for the herds on the program. The idea of reducing the licensing period from 5 years to 2 years is right now about the only tool other than suspension that we would have for very non-compliant operators would be to not renew a license. So by reducing that period to 2 years from 5 years, again that just gives us some more tools for ones that are really non-compliant. The other things that we want to be looking at is consider license conditions. Right now, if you apply for a license, you get one. There may be some conditions where, I think we talked yesterday about For example, some of those highly contaminated premises, maybe some of those we want to make sure that that a license can't ever be issued for those particular properties or something like that. Want to clarify the approval process and again clarify suspension and perhaps add the ability to have a cancellation of a license, because right now in our regulations there's no ability to cancel licenses. There's only that ability to not renew it after the expiry date. So we will be doing more consulting on that. These are things that we're looking at through this year. When we've got some more of the details, we will be consulting and looking for feedback. I've given you the numbers and the renewal time right now. So again, if you have feedback to send, we're open to hearing that. But right now, that is the numbers that there's approval for within the ministry. Want to stop for questions now, or wait?
Whatever you want.
Well, whichever. If it's a burning question, I'll take it. Otherwise, we'll have time at the end as well.
How about new license issue, no one filed condemning, so?
I guess that would be something that will be part of the consideration. I'm not ruling it in or out right now. So chronic wasting disease. Everyone is aware that the changes to the CFIA disease control response program that was originally scheduled for January 1st is going ahead April 1st, 2018. Through December, we did have some indications that it was going to be delayed. We're into March, there's no indication of any delay happening, so I'm fully anticipating that this is in effect on April 1st. CFIA is moving from disease eradication to disease control. I think that from a lot of the discussions we had about CWD yesterday, the possibility of eradication has kind of passed, at least in Saskatchewan and eastern Alberta. So there, it's the move from eradication to control is not something that I would quibble with. I might have some thoughts about the effectiveness of their new control program, but they have chosen to have a compartmentalization approach. So the compartment, they're looking at disease control within a defined compartment, and that compartment is herds on the CWD Voluntary Herd Certification Program. Those herds will have access to the full CFIA disease response, including depopulation with compensation. My understanding is that it's going to be very similar to the approach now for herds that are on the program, with the exception that if the owner decides to opt out, they will be able to do that. So the other thing is for the herds that aren't on the CWD HCP. So they've talked about they won't be taking action. Really, they won't be doing actions except for impacts at the HCP herd. So they want to protect the compartment. So as I understand it, and I haven't seen anything written, this is a verbal description of the program from CFIA. If there's a suspect CWD case, it's still confirmed in the CFIA National Lab. The herd will be put under quarantine, not a declaration of infected place. They'll put on quarantine so the movement controls, while CFIA does the investigation. They'll check to see if the herd is on the DHCP. If it isn't, they'll visit the farm, they'll look at movement records in and out and see if there are any implications with movement to a VHCP herd in the last 5 years. So there's been an animal come in from a VHCP herd in the last 5 years, or animals have moved out to a VHCP herd in the last 5 years, they would follow and do the tracing and protect the compartment. Asked about what about herds that, movements to herds not on the program, and my understanding is they probably wouldn't do that notification, so we would try to work to get that information from them and let the person know themselves, let them know that there was this movement. And you think that there wouldn't be movement in from a positive herd, and then the movement from the non-program. So if it's not on the program, you wouldn't think that they would have a sale to a VHCP herd. But just right now, when we've got some herds signing on that haven't been, and it goes back 5 years, you might have sold something to a herd 3 years ago, and that herd is now on the VHCP, so it could be impacted. Normally, you wouldn't have sales from a non-VHCP herd to a VHCP herd, but you know, when you're looking at 5-year tracing, that is possible. So when they're done that information and tracing, CFI will be looking at removing the quarantine. We're discussing with CFIA about information sharing and letting us know so that we can sort of bridge that. But if they're removing the quarantine, if we're doing anything, that there would be a transition there. So I guess considerations for a provincial CWD response. So, you know, first of all, I guess, does there need to be one, and if so, what it would be, and then how do we make those decisions? So we want to be sure that any program is based on sound science, that we have the legal framework to do it. We have to have the regulatory authority. Government can't just do it because it thinks it wants to. There has to be a regulation to support that. It takes into consideration stakeholder input, and we've had a few meetings with industry. I think back on November 10th, Penny Greenman stopped in, and some of their industry reps were there, and she talked about the changes to the program. We sent some consultation documents about control out to industry at that time. We had a meeting, I think January 16th as well, about a half-day meeting. Really good input collected on movements, and then some more information sent, I think, in February. So we've tried to hear what the concerns are. The other thing we need to consider is cost and human resources to implement. Can we even deliver on the option? And do we have the staff and resources to do what the plan is? We do need to look at what other provinces are doing. And for us, primarily that means Alberta, because they're the other ones that are dealing with endemic CWD. So I've had some conversations and watching their progress. I don't know that they're a lot further ahead than we are in final decisions. And then basically the considerations: what happens if we do have provincial controls? What happens if we don't? We're sort of looking at the pros and cons to the different options. So what I think has been pretty much decided now is that we do think that there is a responsibility for government to try to limit the spread of CWD from game farm to game farm, and to try to slow down spread from infected farms to the local wildlife, and vice versa, or to stop the spread to new areas of the province. And with our control, we are working as well with the Ministry of Environment, and we've had conversations with them about this as well. And I think there is that overarching responsibility. It's to public, it's to wildlife, and I guess now with the some of those primate studies and that niggling idea of theoretical risk to human health, have to consider that as well. And are you taking the responsible actions to limit based on the knowledge at the time? And somebody looking back on this 20 years from now, are they going to think that we did too little, too much, not enough? And that needs to be considered as well. So I think some of the things that will occur, I guess regardless of the CWD control programs in the province, is we will be looking at support for disease prevention. And the details aren't out yet, but under the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, or the CAP program, which is the replacement for Going Forward 2, there will be on-farm biosecurity programming, on-farm assurance programming in both biosecurity and animal welfare. And the cervid industry will have access to those funds the same as all the other livestock groups. So I can't sort of tell you any more details now, and may have said too much already, but the full announcements will be expected in the next few weeks, because those are going to come into place April 1st. We'll continue support for CWD surveillance. We do pay for the on-farm testing. I think it is important that we continue to have the deaths over 12 months of age submitted for testing. Just looking at the positives and the herds that have occurred here, the ones that are regularly submitting, when they do get a positive, it can be 1, 2, maybe 3 on the farm. The ones that have not been complying with the regulations and not been doing inventories have really no idea about numbers. when they start seeing sick animals and it's finally diagnosed. You know, we've had deer herds with 70–80% positives. They've had 30% of the herd gone, like they've already died. They have less inventory than they thought they had. It gets, and then you've got the highly contaminated premises left behind. So I think the earlier it's detected, the better chance there is for controls. And as we move to more producer choice and more options for your controls, you're going to want to know and detect that as soon as you can. So I mentioned already the import protocol update that's going ahead. Velvet, we've been asked about actions by the province. Looking no actions. The velvet is if it's exported, that's under CFIA certification. I do know that Health Canada is going to be looking at velvet antler as a natural health product and reconsider the risk there. So I guess that may change something or may not. I think some of the things that Lane talked about with traceability and be able to trace your product, I think will be important. As far as the some sort of assurance of CWD freedom, I think being on a surveillance program or having good test results on a herd basis may be more important than trying to do individual product testing with the tests that are available right now. Again, trophies, no change. Slaughter, we fully expect that the protocol for Alberta slaughter for CWD positive farms that CFIA has been using to slaughter animals, that will be accessible for us. The province may have to take over some of the roles or credit vet some of the roles that were played by CFIA on those farms, but expect that we will be able to maintain that access for CWD positive herds in Alberta. So I guess actions that are recommended. We are making a recommendation to the minister that we add CWD to the provincial notifiable animal diseases list. It's not currently there. And to name CWD a designated disease under the Diseases of Domestic Game Farm Animal Regulations. So I'll talk about those a little bit more. So this is from the Saskatchewan.ca website. This is a list of the current notifiable livestock diseases. And this list was originally formed in 2013 with anthrax, rabies, and anaplasmosis when CFIA got out of the control of those diseases. We added porcine epidemic diarrhea at the request of the swine industry in 2014. And then we did an updated list in 2015 that added other diseases that we wanted to monitor either for production or trade or human health purposes. So we would be proposing to add chronic wasting disease to that list. And that just ensures that we're notified of any lab case that happens. And then designated diseases. So a designated disease, this is actually copied right from the regulations. So it's a disease designated by the minister and says that to prevent the spread of diseases in domestic game farm animals, the minister may designate diseases that adversely affect the health of domestic game farm animals, including CWD. And for designated diseases, to decide whether or not one was designated a disease, you're supposed to look at available scientific information. I want to point out it also has to include, by regulation, consultations with the minister responsible for administration of the Wildlife Act. So environment does have input into which diseases are designated as well. And then for a designated disease, owners will immediately report to the minister, and actually it would be to the office of the CBO, any domestic game farm animal that they know or suspect. So it's kind of like the conditions for a federal reportable disease would apply to this disease provincially. And then without the authorization of the minister, no owner of the animal mentioned above shall transfer the animal or allow the animal to be transferred to another person. So I think that would allow on a CWD positive premises that movement would not occur from those premises without authorization from the ministry. So the obvious question then is what movements would or wouldn't be allowed. So being quite clear that movement would not be allowed from a CWD positive premises to another breeding farm that's not detected CWD, right? That just wouldn't be consistent with program goals, and I suspect it's not consistent with any of your production goals. You're probably not going to want animals from a positive herd coming onto your herd as a breeding animal if you're not positive. Movements that would be allowed, so movement to inspected slaughter. Again, there may be conditions, and some of those conditions are imposed by Alberta for wanting import. Movement from positive herds across the border to the U.S. I think would be very unlikely. USDA on general does not accept animals with a known disease or with or from a quarantine farm, things like that. So I think access to U.S. slaughter from a positive herd would be very unlikely, but Alberta, I anticipate that there should be okay under very similar conditions to those being implemented by CFIA now.
Can you just go back to the conditions, if you don't mind, because what the owner, something operator knows or suspects, right?
Yeah.
So you would not transfer the animal to another person, period. Therefore, you would not ship to a U.S. slaughter plant, nor would you ship to a slaughter plant without a need report and under the owner's share. Without the other, okay, so you'd have to ask for the authorization of the minister for movement of any animal from a CWD positive premise to any location.
Yes.
So that would apply to a U.S. slaughter plant as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But I don't think the U.S. is going to let them in regardless, even if we said it was okay to go to a terminal slaughter plant, because I don't personally have a problem with them going to a U.S. slaughter plant, but I don't think the U.S. is going to let them in regardless. Movement to an adjacent hunt farm owned and operated by the same operator with conditions like, again, so if you operate your own hunt farm and you're positive, you continue to hunt animals on that premises, or movement to a previously CWD infected terminal hunt farm with conditions. So CFIA has had provision for the last several years that some of those highly contaminated premises that they called that they didn't allow general stocking of cervids on, they would allow them on under a terminal hunt agreement for a limited time. So animals could be transferred on sort of July, August, and they all had to be hunted out by February, March kind of thing, and everything has to be tested coming off. So again, those conditions as far as how quickly they had to be tested and how long they left alive are still somewhat up for discussion, but probably in that 6 to 12 month range, we want the animals all removed and tested. So a big recognition is that these movements are necessary to allow operators to get the economic value from animals. They add little risk, and they are consistent with those program goals of limiting spread to new areas. So I think these ones are fairly likely to go ahead. Again, some of those conditions can be outlined. But I think we recognize that for elk slaughter is certainly an option. For the deer, slaughter option is really not very viable other than a bit of local slaughter. So that the hunting is something that's going to have to happen. So I hope that you've been able to infer from this that the province has no intention of ordering animals destroyed or paying compensation for positive herds when CFIA isn't taking any actions. All we're going to do, we're going to try to limit the spread, but allow at least some economic activity to happen. So this is the one that still needs some more work, and again, any input on this is still welcome. Movements that may be allowed from a CWD positive premises. So first one would be movement to a terminal hunt farm that's not previously had CWD with conditions. So this is moving known positive animals to a place that has not had CWD before. So you can appreciate that environment may be a little sensitive about this one. So what are some of the conditions? One might be removal and testing reasonably quickly after they're transferred on. Might involve those terminal hunt farms not being in specific areas of the province. So I think when we met with the industry last time, we talked about the southeast as being so far undetected. Since then, we've had that detection Wildlife Management Zone 31 right in the southeast corner. But again, we still think we have a fairly low rate of CWD infection in that southeast portion. So there may be not movement allowed of positive animals into that area for hunting. But again, if they're in that area and the farm itself is positive, they would continue to operate. Movement it may involve individual animal testing. So I think the one that we're considering right now is Remalt, but it could evolve as other tests become available. Could be based on negative results before movement, but it may need to be combined with the whole herd test. I think we know that the individual animal sensitivity is not great. Maybe it needs a whole herd test and then individuals, but if you base it on an individual test, then you have to have, it would have to be killed reasonably quickly after, within that sort of 6 to 12 months. The Remalt testing itself, there was quite a bit of discussion on that yesterday. My understanding is that CFIA is prepared to work with labs to validate that test. They have the proficiency panels ready to go, and they would be prepared to validate it as a test. And it's going to be up to laboratories to decide if there's going to be enough return on those tests to go through the expense and effort to validate and get those tests operating. And again, these movements will all add additional risk of spread of CWD to new farms and new areas, but I think there are ways to mitigate that risk. So these are ones where we need some more work and get input from industry, but that's sort of where our thinking is right now. I guess other considerations, so it's mentioned a few times about those highly contaminated premises. These are, in some of them, where there was 80% prevalence of CWD on the animals and clinical animals, and so we know that there's a high buildup of prions on these places. I think well, it was 32. There will be more added from the positives in the last year, but a year ago it was 32 premises and it involved I think 59 quarters of land that CFIA had listed as permanently quarantined. So CFIA will be keeping their declaration of infected place on those properties because they can't remove them. But they are going to be removing the quarantine. So they'll stop the farming of cervids on there, but there'll no longer be the requirement that exists now to keep the fence up to exclude wild cervids. So that could allow then access of wild cervids to some of those highly contaminated premises, unless the province decides to do something on that. So we could institute provincial quarantines. We want to gather some more information from CFIA as far as when the positives were, how long ago they were, what the percentage of prevalence were, what stages and ages kind of things, so that we can make some assessment. There might be some of those 2001 premises that were 5% prevalence back in the day, and they're in an area where there's probably 5% prevalence in the wild now that we wouldn't bother to keep any controls on. But there's some other ones, like I said, that I know there's 70 or 80% prevalence. I think to protect wildlife, we would want to try to maintain a fence around those to exclude wildlife if we can. So I just got the letter about this about a week and a half ago from CFIA that said their intention here. So still looking at it. I think if we can get get CFIA notifiable and designated disease, we will have some tools that we could use there. So next steps, I guess we continue to work on developing options and recommendations. We're still we've heard quite a bit from industry, still looking for more input, some feedback from environment. The final decision is made by the minister based on recommendations, and we'll probably make a few recommendations sort of in our order of preferred, but with the pros and cons, and ultimately the minister makes a decision. We will continue to communicate with CFIA and develop the necessary agreements. And Ian alluded to some of the relationships between provinces and CFIA, and actually we've been lucky enough here that we've had a pretty good relationship with CFIA maintained So we do generally get some good responses back from them. And then I guess communicate the final decisions back to game farm operators. So I guess questions or feedback back to me. I'll take questions now. You know, I don't know if I'm sorry. It's hard to come up with all the answers, and I hope you can appreciate that. It's a very difficult disease, as we talked about yesterday. We refer to this as a wicked problem. It's got, from a disease control point of view, this is kind of a nightmare disease. It's in domestic animals, it's in wild animals, no vaccine, no live test. You know, problems just keep long incubation, persistence in the environment. It's just a sort of a nightmare disease. There's comparisons to things like scrapie and BSE. And again, each of the prion diseases are very different. Scrapie has that absolute resistance related to the RR genotype, and the shedding is really mostly in birthing fluids at lambing and some in milk, but it's more defined shedding. BSE, the prion, is in the specified risk materials. It's in certain tissues of the brain or the nervous system and the gut. And if you remove those from feed and food, that disease is controlled. CWD, the prion, is everywhere. It's just a really tough disease to work on. So I know we've been hearing some concerns about should be more answers and should be further along where we are. I guess just rest assured that it's something that we're really struggling with, and trying to do the best we can and consider the aspects from all points of view to allow ongoing production from game farm, but to again protect that wildlife resource and think about the overall public good and that niggling background of that theoretical public health risk. So with that, I'll take any questions.
First question I have is,
Lots of water. No, go ahead.
with respect, like I said, there's been a lot of discussion about antemortem testing. Is this something that we are going to be able to get included, cost paid on as part of the mandatory surveillance program as we are right now with postmortem testing?
Short answer, no.
And if we ask for it in writing, we would have to send that off to the minister for feedback, or there's a no is a no?
No, I mean, ultimately, the minister does make the decision, so it's worth trying. But I guess I would say, like right now, we're paying for the testing on animals that die or are slaughtered. So it's I don't know, around 110 or 120,000 a year that we pay for that. It's only a percentage of the herd all the time, so you start looking at tests on every live animal on a herd versus just testing the deads, and the costs, do go up astronomically.
Okay, I'll let somebody else talk because I've got a few here.
The declaration of an infected place, I realize this is not your legislation, but you are very familiar with it. What does it mean, the declaration of an infected place to remove the quarantine? What are the ramifications of that declaration?
Okay, I think the direct declaration of infected place means that there is an infection on the place, and they can only remove it. There's 3 conditions. Go back to my years ago with CFA. So they have to believe that the infection does not exist, will not spread, or no longer is a threat, or something like that. So they can't remove that declaration because CWD remains on that place. But the quarantine is related to the movement controls on and off. So they aren't going to do, they aren't doing that. So they won't, again, or the conditions of maintaining the fence. Right now they're supposed to be maintaining a fence around those places. And they allow them to graze other animals, like graze cattle or bison or profit.
Will CFIA specify in a conditions list or where that no farm services are allowed on the property anymore, or is that going to be a provincial response to a CFIA declaration of infected place?
I'm not quite sure how they are going to do that as far as ensuring that there's no farm cervids. I guess that's one of the things I think for us to consider with our regulations. Should we specify that those properties are not included in a new game farm license or something like that to try to just have a secondary control there.
One more before I let it go. The declaration of an infected place, I assume CFIA will only make that declaration on the ones that are previously quarantined. If CFIA is not going to take action on a currently infected farm that's non-VHCP, it is on. Okay, there we go. If CFIA is not going to take any substantive action on a new infected non-VHC farm, will they declare it an infected place?
No, but that's what I said at the beginning. When they do that, if there's a positive herd, they'll go out to the farm, they'll put them in quarantine, but they won't place that declaration of infected place.
So there's still an unequal application of the law retroactively to the places that were declared before, whereas they will not declare any new ones in the future.
Which is, I think, why they're looking at not maintaining the quarantine conditions, because of that unequal application of the law. But they legally cannot remove the declaration of infected place that's already placed, because they can't say that that infection no longer exists there.
So it'd be very interesting to know whether they actually will specify any conditions or whether there will just simply be the verbal declaration.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Certainly have not seen, like even the manual procedures that they have for CFIA staff. I understand the staff had some training on the new program last week, but the manual procedures isn't available yet. They're still making some changes on that. So I certainly haven't seen it to know the details. Back in November, Penny walked us through some of the intent, but I haven't seen the details of their full response either. Harvey has one.
No, I've got a few here. Okay, when we're talking about herds that are on the VHCP and your top herds that are on VHCP, and you're talking about response to positives and opting out, what sort of, is there a time frame that's going to be attached to this, or is there allowances of some sort that say, okay, I want to, let's assume for the moment that we may have an antemortem test that works. Can we say, okay, I want to run all these animals through a testing before I decide if I want to depopulate and so on? Is there going to be that sort of provision in place, or is it going to be, well, you've got 30 days to decide if you're going to opt out or not?
That's a CFIA question. I really don't know, but my impression is, from talking to them, that the decision will need to be made pretty quickly.
Okay, nobody else is putting their hands up, so I'm going to keep asking questions. Okay, with the movement toward a designated disease, is there, I guess the word I'm looking for, is there support going to come from the province to, I don't know if council is the right word I want to use, for a producer who is not a non-enrolled producer who comes down with an infection? Like I said, there's lines that say, okay, well, we're not going to have any response. We are going to have a response, but also is there going to be support that comes along with that? And that's part of what we're struggling with when we say we can't decide what we want to have, where we want this to go, because we don't want to necessarily give everything away either, because there may be something that's going to be available. I mean, the people in this room who are in this all the time, we know what's going on. Probably most of us got a pretty idea in our head what we're going to do one way or the other, but there's 150 some other producers who aren't in this room and have no freaking idea what's going on, and somebody's going to show up at their door and say, you got a positive animal, and they're going to say, what do I do now? So that's kind of where
Yeah, and I expect it's going to take, some time and effort and resources from the vets in our group to help with that. I don't know. I guess that's hard to predict the time it's going to take. I think at some point there may have to be a referral to working with a private vet on some of the information, but certainly to discuss some of the options, bring some information on the disease, and sort of some sort of recommendations and who else to talk to in the industry, those sorts of things. We would be working with them on, yeah. But I don't think we can replace everything that, say, a private vet might do when just dealing with the disease as well. But I mean, for as far as looking at some of the options, because with the designated, it's the no movement. But again, those conditions on the movement, they're at our direction and somewhat at our discretion. So the policy can develop, the policy can evolve, and so it does allow for working, and as long as risk is taken into account, working on some of those live tests for movements and things like that. So it's not, it's not rigidly defined in the regulations. It's movement as without permission or with permission. So what that permission will require can be a little bit fluid and adaptable to producer needs, as long as those parameters of trying to not spread the disease, to new areas is respected.
Just to clarify now, that the naming a designated disease and having the requirements for permission to move, that obviates the need for quarantine on a provincial basis?
Well, that's my hope. I guess one of the options that has to be considered is we do have the powers under the Disease of Animals Act to do quarantines and things as well. But, it's possible, but I think that it can be handled, I think, through the designation of the movement permits without the need for a quarantine.
Do you see any need to continue the federal movement permits?
I think they could have a role certainly in knowing when and where, because ours would only apply to ones that are known positives, right? So the federal movements apply to any movements, so you would have, until replaced by traceability for sure, because I think we still need to know where they moved and, which species and what dates and all those things.
The only problem is that the movement permits truly don't give you that, except when they're given to you. If you get a copy of them, then you enter the data into your system, and your system knows. But CFIA has
No, CFIA doesn't track it. We have a memorandum of understanding with CFIA, and they are supposed to be sending us all, the district offices are supposed to send us the TB brucellosis test results and the cervid movement permits. We have to send them a reminder now and then about that, but
So
we're supposed to get those.
just to clarify, in your mind at this point in time, the continuation of the federal movement permits would not enhance CWD management and response.
Could you restate that again?
Okay, the continuation of the issuance or requirement for a federal cervid movement permit would not be seen as enhancing CWD surveillance, prevention, or response.
I don't think I would agree with that statement, because I think it could be useful for the movement from the, we would only have the control movement on the positive herds. So knowing the movement from the non-positive herds is still very helpful for tracing.
But you also have the requirement to report changes in inventory on all farms in the province, cervid farms.
Yeah, the thing about that is, there is that requirement. We don't get it from everyone.
Just a comment, observation perhaps, with respect to the REML testing, because we use REML testing for screening.
Yes.
Granted, it might be different given the differing epidemiologies of those two prion diseases. It's only the 85% accuracy rate for scrapie as a REML test. We use it as a screening test, and the CFIA, I should say, more precisely, uses it as a screening test in disease investigations. And currently, the only lab, to my understanding, doing REML testing is the CFIA's Fallowfield lab. We're putting in a request to privatize that service and make it available to producers on a cost recovery basis, because we're going to incorporate it into a live animal testing protocol within the scraping program. So it's just a really long way of saying that you're going to have I think you would have challenges getting private labs to go through the accreditation process for an approved REML test. We may have a bit more luck getting the CFIA to privatize it and making it available that way. But to the comment earlier about is there any dollars relevant to getting that testing done, this round of federal funding that becomes available April 1st is a very strong animal health and welfare component being supported in that. And we've had success in the past in disease control programs getting the federal government to reimburse test costs. And I think an even stronger case in this instance where you have a challenge with wild populations and farm populations, I would suggest there's an opportunity to leverage that with Ag Canada and look for funding dollars to help support testing costs. And I don't know how well they'll be incorporated. I know for us, we can't use them as a reliable test. They only have an 85% reliability rate, but when you use them as a testing protocol over a certain number of animals, there's some validity to the positiveness of it. So if you can kind of mobilize the industry a little bit and look for federal funding, it's quite likely you'll find it available there, and you might be able to develop a strategy that helps with all your different control measures. Government's got some money. They like to see animal health and welfare. There's around funding. There's opportunity there. Just an observation.
Thanks, Cody. That's a good advice. The other thing with the noting that this discussion about training on mammal testing for vets, and then Scott yesterday mentioned that they've done a lot of training. Sort of, could we bring him up to do some training, or we talked with CFIA about doing some training or delivering or doing some videos, and said that there are some decent videos out there. Certainly some good videos and training for doing sheep, and really it's not that difficult to do for veterinarians. I was involved with a couple of CFI investigations with some large sheep flocks with all the first two atypical cases where they're still doing the full investigation. And we did 300 at one and 400 at another, and did do those. The ground tests were not that difficult. We had a few animals that, and again, those aged animals where we couldn't get the 6 follicles and get a val test. We had to do the sample a second time before we got the right number of samples. So it's not something that's terribly difficult to learn. I think there are some training opportunities for vets. And Dale, can I put you on the spot? Do you want to address about ground testing and validation at all?
So I'm Dale from Prairie Diagnostic Services. And as far as ground testing, I did get an email from Gordon Mitchell at the National Lab this week that he is in the process of putting together a proficiency and training panel so that our lab can do the ground testing. We have experience in immunohistochemistry testing for prion protein, so it's just a matter of becoming an accredited lab. I guess I came here to see what's going on in the industry and what sort of testing we need to get ready to do. And part of that will be who's paying and what, for us as a business, is there an economic reality for us to get involved in certain things. But I guess that's just going to unfold as we go down this road. But
Are you looking strictly at IHC, or are you looking at any of the other tests as well, like RT-Quick or ELISA?
currently we do the Bio-Rad ELISA.
Okay.
I've also been in contact with the National Lab about the genotype testing procedure.
Okay.
The RT-Quick is not a method that we're currently involved with, but I talked to Sabine about that. She's agreed that she could probably teach us how to do that. So but it's just getting into a new methodology, and we just don't have experience there yet.
And are you a genotyping lab now?
No, I made inquiry. I was here at the meeting last year and heard where the industry might be going, so I made some inquiries to the National Lab. Again, if they would give us their procedures, provide us with a proficiency panel so that we could get accredited, and they were willing to do that, but we haven't gone down that road. Again, it's sort of figuring out what the demand is going to be and if it makes a good business decision for us.
You're probably aware that we've already initiated with CFIA to work with the lab as well that does scrapie genotyping to do CWD in cervids as well. But I'm not saying don't you do it too. Competition's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so that's the thing we'll have to figure out. Is there going to be a national program or provincially or that sort of thing?
I think it's going going to be an industry program by the sounds of CFIA's thinking, is they want the producers to pay for it. So essentially, that's the proposal, and I'm not saying I recommend that, but that's, I think, what we're hearing. Would you agree? Yeah, I think so. So we're in.
Okay, another one. Currently, we have an agreement in place with Alberta that allows us to move animals from positive farms that we depopulated right now to slaughter. Do you have indications from Alberta if they're going to continue to honor that agreement under the new system? My discussion with Alex McKay, just hang on a second. My discussion with Alex McKay said, yes, it sounds like it's going to work, but he says without CFIA's oversight, we're never quite sure if they're going to stick to that program. So all indications that you have so far is Alberta's going to keep the current program in place, and we're all going to be happy with it.
I can't say if you're going to be happy with it, because I know some of you aren't happy with the current program. But all indications are that the access that exists now for CFIA to deal with positive herds will still be available. So exactly what role, where provincial people will have to replace CFIA, or whether we can use accredited vets, and some of those exact details aren't entirely finalized. But just to start with, we should be able to do it through provincial employees. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it or not, but I was listening to 65 CKOM was about a month ago, and this is in the wild population. They're talking about their head sample.
Yeah.
And it was like 800 heads and change that came in, and they had 90 positive test cases. And then the lady was talking about CWD and what that meant for the meat and consumption of the meat. And I just wondered, like, with all the information, what you're saying about the game farm situation, then what's going on with the wild situation? Because if something doesn't happen there, then it's bad PR, press, or impact for the game farm industry, even if we do everything that everybody wants. I mean, 90 positive test cases with people eating that meat and no test results, like, to me, knowing what I know, it sounded horrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have a good story to tell on the farm side, is that they are all tested before consumption.
Right, but I'm thinking about in terms of a press
On the
issue.
farm side, they are.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
farm side, but to Joe Public, I mean, if you have that many heads that tested positive in the wild herd, and something happened negatively, that's going to affect the cervid farm industry. So I'm just kind of confused what's going on with the wildlife population in terms of control or management of CWD.
Yeah, so were you here yesterday?
No.
Okay, so Catherine Mel was here from the Ministry of Environment and talked about what they're doing on the environment side, and I think sort of the gist is that they're beyond they're well beyond eradication as well, and looking at controls and things that they can maybe do to manage populations on the landscape, whether it's decreasing densities and trying to reduce congregation and trying some different things to try to see if they can impact prevalence and bring it down in some areas. As a government, we've been working with both the Ministries of Environment and the Ministries of Health on CWD. We used to have a lot of difficulty engaging health in the file. They always just said there was, we weren't concerned about it, and that's changed this year. So there was updates made to the Saskatchewan.ca, again, website on the CWD information. There's more linkages between the hunting and the farm information as far as testing goes. The World Health Organization and CDC and Health Canada have recommended for a long time that no known positive TSE animals should be consumed. We've gone a little further actually in our messaging in Saskatchewan, given the high prevalence in the wild, to say that animals should be tested negative before consumption. So we've made a stronger message than I think exists in a lot of other places. Again, I think we've got a good story on the farm side in that they are supposed to be tested before consumption. On the wild side, I guess we recognize that we do have some challenges. We managed to increase the sampling from about 300 a year to getting closer to 900. But if there's 40,000 licenses issued a year, if don't know how many of those are hunted, but like it's sort of the worst nightmare to imagine the logistics and the sampling if we got 20,000 samples. I know, so I think that's the next conversation we have to be having now through this year before next hunting season is what we can do to make, for recommending they should be tested, how can we make that testing more accessible and more timely? Because a lot of hunters were waiting 2 months to get the test results back this year. My hour is up, can I go now? No, any more questions? Okay, and I'm around, well, we were going to be paying attention to Curly next, but again, I've got my contact information and open to hearing ideas and suggestions, sort of struggle through this together and do the best we can.